Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and a very warm welcome as ever to the Booms and Bust Show. My name is Jonathan Davis, and today is Monday the 1st of October, my God, 2018. We've had 3 quarters of the year, and on Friday we had the closing prices for the week, and for the month, and for the quarter. So that gives me lovely charts with vast amounts of data to look at and comment upon. I'll come back to that later in the programme. For new listeners, the Booms and Bust Show is about free market capitalism, libertarianism, freedom, liberty, and increasing prosperity, maybe even giving you some ideas that you can go and do due diligence on to help your own investments and pensions. And also, I rightly ravage against socialism, which is an absolutely disgusting creation of power-hungry people and has been for ever. They just decided to call it socialism about 150 years ago. In Venezuela, for example, a 2.4 kilogram chicken is now worth 14,600,000 bolivars. Hey, that's brilliant, isn't it? So much for socialism making people poorer. Yeah, a chicken's worth 14.5 million. Fantastic. If you listen to the Booms and Busts shows, you must also read the Booms and Busts report. I just sent one out on Friday, being every 2 months, end of September is when it was due. The Booms and Busts report is free. It's got a lot of great background information on it that I cannot go through in the show. Send your full name and email address to jd@theboomsandbustsshow.com. You will never be junk mailed. On This Week in History, gold was discovered in the American River at Sutter's Mill in 1848, launching the California Gold Rush. About 300,000 people from all over the world came seeking gold and, of course, their fortune. And in case there are people out there who don't know this apocryphal story, the people who made the most money were the retailers who sold the picks and shovels. Sounds very much like Bitcoin to me. There's a massive moral of investing in that story. Do not get caught up in hype, and where possible, invest in the picks and shovels guys, and you'll easily be able to spot them when you're looking. 80 years ago yesterday, the 30th of September, Britain and France gave that nice chap Adolf Hitler a slice of Czechoslovakia at the Munich conference. Isn't that nice? They hoped to avoid war, but only delayed it. Does that remind you of things that are going on today? Also, on This Week in History, in the year 1452, 450 years ago, the first section of the Gutenberg Bible was finished in Mainz in Germany by the printer Johannes Gutenberg. Printing as we know it commenced. And doesn't the Gutenberg printing press get to the heart of what I and you, the listener, what we're trying to achieve in thinking about the issues raised in the Booms and Bust show? For the first time, literally in human history, a wider section of the population beyond the high priests and the monarchs we're actually able to read the ideas of someone else, as opposed to, as I say, those which were posted on the walls of the church or the proclamations from the reigning monarch. And of course, the internet is the 21st century equivalent, and in fact, I'm going to be coming back to that. And when we were in Switzerland in the summer, in August, in fact, as we were arriving at our accommodation for the first evening, we drove past in this beautiful, my God, achingly beautiful town of Freiburg in sort of northwest Switzerland, not to be confused with Freiburg in Germany, Freiburg in Switzerland. And we passed an arrow which pointed to the Gutenberg Museum. Well, you know, I will go back to that spot within the next few years because it was unbelievably beautiful. And I will then go into that museum. We just didn't have the time, and we'd already planned the several days that we were going to be there. But I will go into that. And isn't it absolutely fantastic that 4.5 centuries after he started printing, there is still a museum to the great man's work. And he did an amazing service to humanity. Of that, there is no doubt. Thank you to, I believe it's now 28 listeners who retweeted last week's podcast. I put out a call for listeners to do so. Have to say, that's a fraction of the number of listeners, and I can well imagine there's probably a number of listeners who, for whatever reason, don't want to be associated with an economics, markets and politics podcast. I get that, especially when you look at the Booms Busts Show Twitter account. It pulls no punches. I pull no punches in the show and on Twitter. So, okay, you know, for professional reasons or something like that, I totally get that some people will not want to be openly associated, but totally buy in to the ideas and indeed want to learn more. But there must be hundreds of folk who could easily retweet the show. And I want to spread the message, and I'm sure you want to spread the message of free markets and capitalism and libertarianism. So, you know, we ought to be seeing dozens and dozens. We ought to be seeing 100 retweets at least every week. So I'm hoping that you'll help. You'll retweet this show and you'll do so again and again. If you don't, please let me know why you're not retweeting. I'd love to know. The easiest way to get this podcast, I would suggest, is to simply click on audioboom.com, go to listen, search for Booms, and then click. Also, when you do that, subscribe to the show, and then it will automatically come into whatever device it is you've been using whenever I publish. Also have a look at Podcast Addict. And finally, if you use iTunes, then of course we're on there. The world is going mad, as we know. Here is another example. A wonderful woman who took in 27 dogs and cats during Hurricane Florence has been arrested for lacking the proper permits for her temporary shelter, where she's accused of providing veterinary care without a license. You couldn't make it up. So we saw just 3 days ago on Friday, we saw a demonstration of teachers and head teachers in particular in Westminster, demonstrating at so-called budget cuts in education. Why were primary head teachers protesting about, quote, cuts, unquote? Well, we'll come back to that in a second, because we should note that inflation adjusted per pupil funding in primary schools increased by 114% between 1997 and 2015, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Perhaps the demonstration has got something to do with the fact that only 8% of teachers votes Conservative, or did so at the 2017 general election. And let me remind you that 1,900 head teachers are paid in excess of £100,000. These people aren't, but should be, utterly, utterly ashamed of themselves. Now, if women are to be believed without question, accusations alone will be enough to have people imprisoned or at least erased from public life. Judge Kavanaugh. It appears that we've become a society where someone can be criminalised instantly by the public due to an allegation. No evidence, no corroboration, or even testimony under oath is required for people to be instantly labelled a perpetrator. This is what communists and fascists do. This should disturb the hell out of everyone. Now let me tell you, in 2006, George W. Bush nominated Brett Kavanaugh to the Washington, D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. It was on live national television. Where was Dr. Ford? Why didn't she get in touch with Senator Feinstein? No, it's only when Trump appoints. The headline: Christine Blasey Ford's friend is not refuting Ford's allegation, will cooperate with FBI, lawyer says. The article, quote, however, the simple and unchangeable truth is that she is unable to corroborate it because she has no recollection of the incident in question, unquote. Is that from the journalist or from the institution? No, that was from her attorney. It's a travesty. If Kavanaugh isn't appointed soon to the Supreme Court, to me it's like the beginning of the end of civilization. And we know for a fact that the reason why the Democrats have been playing delaying tactics again and again and again is because they don't want the guy appointed before the midterm elections, because then that would be a, quote, win, unquote, to Trump. It's quite utterly, utterly disgusting. Because Kavanaugh, of course, has got his wife and children in the public eye when this should never, ever have happened. From what I read, Ford is going to get her massive comeuppance because from what I read, no one is going to corroborate her story to the FBI. On verra. Andrew Neil, the Spectator and BBC guy, he tweets, Venta Maersk, Maersk the shipping company, a new ice-strengthened Danish container ship, is on its way through the still ice-plagued Northeast Passage, north of Russia, from Asia to Europe. It's a trial run to see if global warming is making this a viable sea route in the summer. It's still ice-plagued. We have a jaw-dropping study of the extent of left-wing bias in top US universities. Registered Democrats outnumber Republicans by incredible ratios. For example, in sociology, 44-1. In English, 48-1. Let's get to a more hard subject. Mathematics, 5.6-1. Sciences, 6-1. Psychology, 17-1. History. Remember, he who writes the history determines what happened. History, 17.4-1. What else we got? Communications, 108-0. Why? Because there were no registered Republican voters. This is what we're up against. This is also what we're up against, folks. Edward Snowdon, one of the great men of our time. He tweeted last week, "The UK just admitted the global mass surveillance system was used against civil society, people like you. These programs were never about crime or terrorism. They're about power. It's about control." He was referring to a report from Privacy International, which said that court documents revealed that the UK intelligence agency unlawfully spied on Privacy International, who have been fighting against mass surveillance for years. This comes straight from their report. The UK's domestic-facing intelligence agency, MI5, and of course, I'm now going to be taken out of the trillions and trillions of data because I've just used those 3 syllables, and someone is now going to listen to this podcast. They today admitted that it captured and read Privacy International's private data as part of its bulk communications data and bulk personal data sets programs. They hoover up massive amounts of the public's data. In further startling legal disclosures, all 3 of the UK's primary intelligence agencies, GCHQ, MI5 and MI6, also admitted that they unlawfully gathered data about Privacy International or its staff. The intelligence agencies have repeatedly denied that their programs are tantamount to mass surveillance of people not suspected of any wrongdoing. Documents published today demonstrate that Privacy International, an international non-governmental organisation, has been caught up in MI5's investigations because its data was part of the UK intelligence agency's vast databases. Snowdon adds, "The power to always know everything about anyone so that you can control the outcome of anything they try to do." Sound abstract? It's your Stalker X, but with a military. We should all be very, very worried. Surely a candidate for sainthood is Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the guy who invented the internet. He's launching Inrupt, INRUPT, a startup business has been building for the past 9 months. Its mission is to decentralize the web and take back power from the forces that have profited from centralizing it. In other words, it's game on for Facebook, Google, Amazon, etc. For years now, Berners-Lee and other internet activists have been dreaming of a digital utopia where individuals control their own data and the internet remains free and open, because we know the EU, the UK government, the US government, and certainly the Chinese and goodness and everyone else, they're all trying to shut down the internet, and of course they are all succeeding. Berners-Lee said, "We have to do it now. It's a historical moment." Ever since social media have used our data nastily, Berners-Lee has felt an imperative to get this digital idyll into the real world. He explained that he's taking a sabbatical from MIT to work full-time on Inrupt. The company will be the first major commercial venture built off Solid, a decentralized web platform he and others at MIT have spent years building. In other words, an alternative to the internet. People would own all their own data. That means they could trust a home device like an Alexa type device with health records, children's details, financial records. That is the kind of machine Berners-Lee hopes will spring up all over Solid to flip the power dynamics of the web from corporations to individuals. The difference between the web that, as I say, he invented and Solid is that on Solid, all the information is under your control. Power to you, Sir Tim. Saint Sir Tim. Now, you might have followed on Twitter that James Wood, you know, the movie actor, Shark in the TV series and so on, he's refused to delete a tweet which Twitter said had, quote, the potential to be misleading in a way that could impact an election, unquote. So his account with 1.7 million followers was suspended. I tweeted when I heard about this could be the end of the beginning of the end of Twitter wokeism. Who knows? Let's see what happens. Remember about free speech. When you censor an idiot, you prevent everyone from discovering they're an idiot, including themselves. There's an interesting statistic, he says, moving on. With just 8% of the world's population, Latin America accounts for roughly a third of global murders. 145,000 per annum. I quoted from the Quran last week. I'm going to go and do so again and give you some more quotes from the Quran. A religion of peace. Quran 8:65. The unbelievers are stupid. Urge the Muslims to fight them. 8:60. Muslims must muster all weapons to terrorize the infidels. 8:12. Terrorize and behead those who believe in scriptures other than the Quran. And one more for today. 9:5. When opportunity arises, kill the infidels wherever you find them. So, this is what Muslims are being taught day after day after day after day. A 65-year-old Swedish woman has been sentenced to 3 months in prison for hate speech, for criticising Islam and saying the IQ level in Sweden would fall as a result of immigration. Meanwhile, migrant rapists are being given community orders in Sweden. A girl raped by up to 70 Telford grooming gang members from the age of 12. These guys must be really great people. Has seen just one of those men convicted over these vile crimes. This girl, this victim, was pregnant at 13, and she suffered 4 years of abuse and faced death threats from the network of primarily Islamic paedophiles in the town. She said, and I quote, "All I want is justice, because the men who raped me are walking around scot-free. I am terrified they're doing what they did to me to other innocent young girls in Telford." Unquote. The now 19-year-old said she bumps into her abusers, quote, "every time she goes home," unquote. Balraj Singh, 23, is the only man convicted of abusing her, jailed for 3.5 years. A DNA test on the aborted fetus identified another man who got her pregnant, but charges were dropped when he said he believed she was 16. Whatever happened to ignorance of the law is no excuse in the United Kingdom. A chap by the name of Ahmed Huber is in Kevin Coogan's book, The Mysterious Ahmed Huber, Friend of Hitler, Allah and Ibn Laden, which came out in 2002. Mr. Huber quotes his friend, Hitler: "The only religion I respect is Islam. The only prophet I admire is the Prophet Muhammad," unquote. Last week, during a state dinner that Merkel put on for the Turkish president, Erdogan, Merkel lamented the deterioration of the rule of law and human rights in Turkey, and Erdogan accused Germany of hosting, quote, "hundreds, thousands," unquote, of terrorists. Then the next day, Erdogan opened the new largest mega mosque in Cologne, funded by money from Turkish people. Did anyone see any Union Jacks at the Labour conference? No, but there were lots of Palestinian flags. The amazingly great St. Thomas Sowell. In a democracy, we have always had to worry about the ignorance of the uneducated. Today, we have to worry about the ignorance of people with college degrees. The greatest con, I would say to you, listener, of our generation is university education. It's managed to increase in cost while decreasing in value. Thomas Sowell also said, just as the American left has adopted blacks as mascots. You should Google this guy and see what colour he is, by the way. So the international left has adopted Palestinians as mascots. In both cases, the actual well-being of the mascots is not the point. And it's probably worth pointing out at this time, history that is never taught. The first 23 black senators were Republicans. I should have said earlier that China's social credit score that they're putting together will be totally completed within a year or two is absolutely terrifying. A real-time score gets deducted if you buy too much alcohol, jaywalk, post something, quote, offensive, unquote, on social media, etc. Punishments include you can't travel by air or high-speed train. You can't work in government. China's communist government has recently shut down more than 4,000 websites and online accounts in a 3-month campaign against, quote, harmful, unquote, online information. And if you substitute harm for hate, this is the exact same reason that big tech companies give for banning conservatives. Let's move on to economics. Last night, Canada and the United States reached an agreement alongside Mexico on a new NAFTA, a modern trade agreement. They've called it the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or the USMCA for short, soon to be made into a hit record by the village people. And of course, it will tip the balance back from Mexico and Canada to America. And everyone hates Trump. Isn't it amazing? Now, Trump has done amazing things on the international stage. Absolutely amazing. Israel, Cuba, Iran, North Korea, this US MCA, China, you name it, the EU, it's just incredible. And he's doing amazing things in America too. But do not think for one moment that I've got these rose-tinted glasses. He is as fiscally inane as any socialist, any cronyist has ever been. In the last 12 months, the US government spent $652 billion on defense. It spent $193 billion on its armed forces veterans. And in the last 12 months, it spent $320 billion just on debt interest alone. And that's with just about the lowest borrowing rates in history. Literally in history. And borrowing rates have been rising rapidly. Even at current rates, given the level of borrowing that Trump and his cronies are doing and prior presidents have done, in 10 years, the interest payment alone will be over £900 billion. That'll be pretty good if you're a banker lending all that money in the Cayman Islands on the beach, and every breath that you take, you earn an interest payment. Now, I talked at length in last week's Booms and Busts report. As I say, if you don't subscribe to it, send me your email. Go back to the beginning of the show for the address. Between now and 2020, it's only a year and a half, 2 years from now, the US will raise interest rates from currently 2% to 3 or 3.5%. The UK is likely to go to 1.5% to 2.5% over the next year or two. This is going to double new mortgage rates. Double them. Do you know anyone who's had an increase in their salary of 50 to 100%? No. Thus, people will have to borrow less. Thus, this is going to have a detrimental effect on house prices. That's what I'm forecasting. I'm forecasting a 16% fall in house prices from last year to 2020 in London. Let's see. Even Mario Draghi, the ECB president, sees a vigorous pickup in core euro area inflation. In other words, he's telling the world even the ECB is likely to raise interest rates. That is absolutely huge. The euro area, Sweden, Switzerland, they still, Japan, they still have negative base rates. And governments, sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, you name it, hedge funds, they've been lending to governments getting a negative interest rate. Yes, they've actually been prepared to accept less money for their loan. It's amazing but true. In 2016, there was $13 trillion of negative yielding bonds. Last year, there was $10 trillion of negative yielding bonds. This year now, there is $6 trillion of negative yielding bonds. What does this mean? It means that lending rates are rising. There's fewer and fewer negative interest rate bonds. Interest rates are going up, folks. Get used to it. In America, they fix their mortgages for the long term. And it's very easy to refix if rates come down. But the 30-year mortgage rate is now at the highest point since 2011. House prices have to be falling in America. Small business optimism in America has hit a high, an all-time high since records began in the early 1970s. There's nothing slowing down in America, the most important economy on the planet. Just talking about interest rates, and we should also therefore look at the amount of debt in society. In developed markets, 20 years ago, debt was 266% of developed market GDP. Today, it's 382% of GDP in developed markets, which actually is slightly down from 387% in 2012. In emerging markets 20 years ago, they had debt of 131% of emerging market GDP. Today, it's 210% of GDP. So when you read nonsense that emerging markets are overblown with debt, sure, it's a heck of a lot of debt. But in relative terms, it's 2/3 what we've got. Which segues nicely to a chart I've got here of the most expensive prime property in the world. For $1 million of your US dollars, you can get 173 square meters in Sao Paulo. In Mumbai, you can get 92 square meters. In Miami, you can get 78. In Los Angeles, 58. In Singapore, 39. In London, 28. In Monaco, just 16 square meters. Wonderful chart. Melbourne, 90. I saw Sydney somewhere. Where did I see Sydney? Yeah, there it is. Sydney, 48. Paris, 46. Beijing, 66. You go through those numbers again. Berlin, 77. Very interesting. Share of global GDP. 1975, the EU had 32%. China, 3%. 1995, the EU had gone down to 22%. China had gone up to 8%. 2016, the EU was now down to 16% of global GDP, and China was 15%. And in 2017, they're both neck and neck at 16%. And those people in Birmingham at the Conservative Party conference, the people on the stage, most of them want us to stay in the EU. The people in the audience and some of the speakers, they want us out. But unfortunately, the leaders have decided that's not going to happen. Well, let's see. Elon Musk, no doubt, very great guy. He was sued by the Securities and Exchange Commission, in other words, the regulator of the US, for securities fraud. Because, he tweeted that he's going to take Tesla private at $420 a share. He said, funding secured. He tweeted that. And of course, the share price of Tesla soared because it was well under 420 at the time. There were lots of people who were shorting the market. They got absolutely burnt. Now, this is not the kind of thing that a chief executive officer or anyone who's an insider is allowed to do. You have to go through the normal channels. You have to make an announcement through the stock exchange and so on. And therefore, everyone gets the information at the same time. Well, he did a deal with the SEC. He was personally fined $20 million. Tesla was fined $20 million. He can no longer do unsupervised tweets, and he had to step down as chairman for 2 years. This happened literally at the weekend. Today, Monday, the 1st of October, Tesla's up 15%. It's an absolute outrage. This guy should have been chucked out and banned from being a director of a public company for 5 years. This should never have happened. If you or I had done this, we would have been imprisoned for 5 years. It is fraud left, right, and centre. I have little doubt this guy had some options on his shares and he made a fortune when the price soared. Another fortune. Statement from the chairman of the SEC, Jay Clayton, on the settlement. He basically said that Elon Musk is too important to Tesla and forcing his removal would punish Tesla investors. This is what he said. Corporate fines often are financed with funds that could otherwise benefit shareholders, and the skills and support of certain individuals may be important to the future success of a company. It seems to me he's just set up the legal defense of any chief executive accused of malfeasance from now on. Talking of Tesla, electric vehicles in China, new car sales have now hit 5% of total vehicle sales in August of this year. It was 2.1% in 2017 and around 1% in 2016. I keep telling you about uranium miners. You need to keep in mind the medium-term picture. China's nuclear program alone, because they need nuclear energy to power all these tens, potentially hundreds of millions of electric vehicles they're going to have within 10 years. Chinese nuclear program alone will require a 5-fold increase in demand for uranium. How much fuel does it take to power a light bulb for a year? Coal, you need 714 pounds. Natural gas, you need 143 pounds equivalent. Nuclear, 0.035 of a pound. Uranium is the most powerful commodity to produce energy that we know of on planet Earth. Volkswagen, so many international car producers are getting in the act. They've just announced their affordable electric car. It'll be offered in 3 battery configurations, starting at around 25,000 euros. It's not cheap, but it ain't a fortune, is it? It's going to be called the VW Neo. No matrix reference there. The smallest battery will take you 400 kilometers between charges. The Neo will be slightly longer than a Golf, and Auto Express, from where I read this online, the details of the vehicles should be revealed about a year from now. So, by 2025, there will be tens of millions electric vehicles on the world's roads. I saw an email from a financial markets trader who lost everything selling Dow Jones futures contracts. This chap asked him, why did you sell something which is so bullish? Stocks are in a multi-year bull market. He answered, he was reading The Economist, the FT, the Wall Street Journal, and because of that he had the view that trade wars will cause a significant correction in the markets. It's called brainwashing. As I've said before, we're now in or about to be in the more bullish half of the year, October or November to about April. As far as I'm concerned, we're in a multi-year and possibly decade bull market. I showed a chart in the Booms and Busts report that we've just been through a decade and a half very similar to the 1930s and early 40s, and also the 1970s and 1980s, after which we had 10 or 20 years of incredible stock market growth. The best time to avoid the media and news is when stocks are going down. The second best time is when stocks are going up. Gold. So who holds the most gold? The United States. Germany is in number 2. Then Italy, of all people. Then France. Then Russia, China, Switzerland, Japan, the Netherlands, and India. That comes from the World Gold Council. You notice I didn't mention the UK. The UK has about 310 tons of gold. The US has 8,000. Who else might we be interested in? Germany, 3,300. China, 1,700. Russia, 1,350. And Russia is now actually the biggest acquirer in the world. Turkey has even got 500 to our 310. Portugal, 380. It's just dire. Our governments just don't know how to manage our money. Since 2010, central banks around the world have turned from previously being net sellers of gold to net buyers. For 6 years, in fact, Russia has been the largest purchaser of gold, overtaking China to claim the 5th largest spot in 2017. Bank of America Merrill Lynch, according to their fund managers, they say the net percentage of gold under-positioned in portfolios is at a record 17-year low. The last time it was down here in 2001, gold was at $250 when it was net really tiny in portfolios. It's net tiny in portfolios again. The price of gold to the price of silver is again at a huge 80 plus to 1. Historically, the gold-silver mining markets bottom at around 80 to 1. We are now back at the level we were at before the mini bull of 2016. What a joke Britain is. We don't have a gold mine. I think actually we might do in Scotland because I visited it in 2010. Maybe the report is that the gold, it shut down as soon as it opened. And yet, the UK, so far this year, it's exported 294 tons of gold to Switzerland. And you know where it goes once it's smelted in Switzerland? It goes to China and Russia and India and so on. Markets. US natural gas has broken up out of a 3-year falling trend. Now, that doesn't say that it's going to soar from here, but it's a very, very important technical move. The oil and gas company Shell and partners have this weekend approved a $31 billion project to speed getting gas to Asia. It's a liquefied natural gas project in Western Canada. It's the largest new one of its kind in years. It will carve out the fastest route for North American gas to get to Asia. To Tokyo, it will take 8 days versus 20 from the US Gulf down south. It's the 1st of October. October, according to Mark Twain, this is one of the peculiarly dangerous months to speculate in stocks. The others are July, January, September, April, November, May, March, June, December, August, and February. Basically, the guy didn't know how to invest. with the universities being filled up again. I think we should congratulate the chief executive of UCAS, which is like the central agency for applying to get to university. She wrote, "Dear applicant," this is a real letter, "Application to Hogwarts University. We regret to inform you that your application to the stated establishment cannot be processed at this time due to the fact that it does not exist. After consultation with our mystic advisors, we have also determined that even if it did exist, the course Wandology would be highly in demand and hence require at least 2 A's and a B in any of the following subjects: advanced spellcrafting, mystematics, defense against the dark arts, I should blooming hope so, history of the occult, and shaft design. Your handwritten grade sheet claiming top marks in waving a stick about, wearing a pointy hat, and watching Paul Daniels' TV specials, a TV magician, sadly is not suitable for submission. However, by applying through clearing, you may be suitable for a selection of liberal arts courses. Alternatively, you may wish to resubmit next year by tying your letter to an owl and hoping for the best. On behalf of UCAS, I wish you every success. Mary Cunnock, Cook, OBE Chief Executive. Congratulations, Mrs. Cunnock Cook." On that note, I want to thank you again, listener, for the success of the Booms and Bust podcast, but I really do need your support. If you haven't yet done so, please retweet the show. As ever, I've had an absolute blast, and listener, I'll see you again next week.